Let's do something I haven't done in a while. Use philosophy to examine a current social issue and offer solutions. When I started this channel, more than 3 years ago, this was one of its main mission statements. I was reacting mainly to the rise of anti-liberal forces on the left, what we call the regressive left, who were dominating the online discourse. I tried to fight these regressives by offering liberal solutions to the issues they brought up. A bit later, we became troubled by the rise of anti-liberal forces on the right, what is called the alt-right, and I was doing the same for the issues they brought up. By now, however, it feels like the liberals are back in power. On both the left and the right, the online discourse is dominated by liberals. It is time to go back to discuss the unresolved problems within liberalism itself. One issue that is still hanging is the issue of the rights of transgendered people, in which several liberal values seem to clash with one another, and it is not yet clear what the liberal position should be. I am going to take a look at it from my left-wing perspective, and say what I believe the liberal position should be. The question I will attempt to answer is, are trans women women? It is a question on which I find both the regressive leftist answer of definitive yes, and the conservative answer of definitive no, to be deficient. Everything I say here applies to trans men as well, of course, but most recent arguments revolve around trans women, so I will focus on them. For starters, let's look at an answer provided by someone who is on the conservative side of the liberal spectrum.
But just for clarity, do you think a trans woman is a real woman?
I don't really like the way those questions are formulated. I don't know what that means. What do you mean a real woman?
Well, I'm asking you, in your mind, it depends what you think a real woman is, but do you think a trans woman is a woman?
No.
Why not?
Because I think that women are capable, generally speaking, of having babies, and they have female genitalia, and they have an XX chromosome, and I think the biological markers are relevant. It doesn't necessarily mean that I don't think that people should be treated with respect and dignity if they happen not to fit easily into a gender category. That's a different issue.
Yeah, this is not a good answer, and it weakens Peterson's position in his important fight for freedom of speech. This segment shows, once again, how much the intellectual dark web is in dire need of a philosopher, because philosophy can provide satisfying answers to such questions. Let me have a go at it. So how do we approach this question? Well, let me take you back to a video I made about a year ago, which was called The Math Fallacy. If you haven't watched it, I suggest that you do, as it will help you understand the argument I am making here. In that video, I defined a certain fallacy employed by the regressive left. The fallacy is based on misrepresenting Western liberal society and arguing that it defines categories of people in an essentialist manner, meaning that it regards certain attributes as essential to the definition of that category of people. In the video we just saw, Jordan Peterson took an essentialist view on women and identified them as necessarily having certain attributes, such as XX chromosomes. For an essentialist, anyone who doesn't possess that essential attribute does not belong to the category of women. Regressive leftists claim that Western society thinks like Peterson, and that this shows that it is an oppressive society. In response, I argued that Western society defines categories of people by what Ludwig Wittgenstein called family resemblance. According to this idea, there is no attribute that is essential to a category. Instead, there are attributes that are typical to a category, and the more of those attributes one possesses, the more that individual belongs to that category. So there are no clear borders to a category, which would allow you to determine in each case whether an individual belongs to it or not. However, since typical attributes usually go together, in most cases it is obvious if one belongs to a category or not. In the case of gender, it is almost always easy to tell if one is a man or a woman. But there are exceptions, individuals who are not so easily defined, and liberal society accepts that these individuals exist, and doesn't try to force its categories on them. Transgendered people are one of these exceptions. Trans women are individuals who were born biologically male, and were therefore considered boys. But as they grew up, they realized that they feel like a woman. This has two manifestations. Either they feel alienated to their male body and want to have female body parts, or they feel alienated to masculine behavior and would rather behave in a feminine way. Usually it's both. They start to transition, gradually becoming more womanly in look and behavior, and often also have plastic surgery to alter their anatomy. If it goes well, they reach a point in which they have more feminine attributes than masculine attributes. At this point, according to the family resemblance principle, they become women. Some people deny that humans can have a gender that isn't defined by their biology, and refer to trans women as men. I categorically reject this position. This is not a liberal position. A trans woman is not a man. But the question then becomes, is she a woman? Or is she something else, a different category? The question we are basically asking is being trans an attribute or an identity? If it's an attribute, then she is a woman. She is a woman who is trans, in the same way that you can be a woman who is tall, a woman who is blonde, or a woman who is Portuguese. If it's an identity, then she is a trans woman, something different from a woman. The latter option is the one people like Jordan Peterson espouse, and earlier I said that it is an unsatisfying answer. But if we say that trans women are women, we run into a whole host of problems which are currently being played out in our culture. Can we come up with a better answer? Well, let me take you back to something else I talked about in the math fallacy video. I presented Wittgenstein's concept of language games. Wittgenstein points out that our everyday language doesn't have one set of rules, but is actually a collection of many language games, each with its own set of rules. Within a language game, a certain term can have a slightly different meaning than in another game, because the context is different. When we speak, we constantly switch between those language games, and usually we are capable of doing so and still understand one another. I also pointed out that in some language games, things are defined in an essentialist way. As an example, I gave a hypothetical case in which we discover a liquid that is like water in every single way, except that its chemical composition isn't H2O. I said that in this case it would be correct for all of us to refer to this liquid as water, except for the chemist, because in the language game of chemistry, water is rigidly defined as H2O, and chemistry would break down if it didn't take this essentialist approach. Let's apply this to our case. Are trans women women? Yes, in general. But there are certain language games in which they are not, and as a society we have to determine what these language games are. Determining these language games is what we should be focused on, and once we do, we will be able to solve the problems that we are dealing with today. Let's say that I am having a regular conversation with a trans woman. If she looks and acts like a woman, then I'll feel like I'm talking to a woman. I know this for sure, because I've experienced this situation. It is also possible that I experienced it without knowing that I'm talking to a trans woman. And if you were that woman, you had no obligation to inform me about it. I have no need to know about this any more than I need to know that you dye your hair. But let's say I then make a pass at you, and you are interested. In this case, you have to immediately make sure that I know that you are trans, because we have just switched into the language game of courting, of romance, and in this language game, this attribute is an essential part of your identity. When a man is romancing a woman, it is partly based on certain assumptions he makes about her anatomy, and not making him aware would constitute a deception. Even if you had all the operations, you are still obliged to inform him that you are trans, because he might be the kind of man who is only interested in women that can give birth. In short, in your regular everyday life, you are a woman who is trans, but when it comes to romance, you are a trans woman. Recently, there has been an issue with trans women going into beauty salons and asking for a bikini wax. If they still had penises, some of the workers refused to service them, and trans activists tried to turn this into a human rights issue. The claim is that if you deny trans women the same service that you give other women in this one case, you are basically saying that they are not women. The answer to that is no. If we say that in some context you are not a woman, it doesn't mean that we deny it in general. In this case, I think most of us will agree that having a penis makes an essential difference, and thus makes trans women a different category. Society should provide a solution that will allow them to have a bikini wax, but the solution is not to force beauty salons to treat them as if they were women. One context in which this question is a hot button is sports. The argument made by trans activists is that trans women should be allowed to participate in women's sports, and denying them that possibility is discrimination. In contrast, we are seeing some places taking an essentialist view of gender, which can lead to absurdities like the case of Mac Beggs, a Texan trans man who wants to wrestle against boys, but the state forces him to wrestle against girls, which he easily defeats. This just goes to show how dumb the essentialist view is. I assume that Beggs is taking testosterone injections. How can it possibly be fair to other girls to have him in the competition? The answer to the trans activists' demand has to be different, and it begins by pointing out that women's sports are exclusionary by nature. They exclude people who do not have a female biological system. Male sports, on the other hand, are not exclusionary. We do not say that Shaquille O'Neal has an unfair biological advantage and therefore he cannot play basketball. Unless we'll find that Shaq's mother was inseminated by an alien giant species, he is eligible. Women are not excluded either, if they are good enough. You can see it in chess, where men are better, but women are good enough to give them a competition. So in chess there is a world championship, in which both men and women can compete, and the women's world championship, in which men are excluded. Now, when you have an exclusionary field, you have to decide where to draw the line, and due to the diversity of human nature, with some individuals it's not going to be clear which side of the line they fall on. You see it in the current debate around Caster Semenya, an Olympic gold medalist and a 2-time world champion in the 800-meter run. Semenya is a woman, but her anatomy, it is rumored, has some male elements in it. The argument around whether or not she should be allowed to compete against women has been going on for years, and recently it was decided that she can do so only if she takes drugs to reduce her testosterone levels. This debate will probably go on, and it just goes to show how there is never a clear border when it comes to imposing different categories on the diversity of nature. So the issue here involves not just trans women. It is a bigger issue of deciding where the line is for eligibility to compete in women's sports. As for trans women, the International Olympic Committee has decided back in 2003 that they should be allowed to compete in women's sports, as long as they had all the operations undertaking female hormones. There hasn't been much of a kerfuffle about it, but I suspect it is because there have not been any really successful trans women athletes yet. In 2018, a trans woman became a world cycling champion, causing uproar and sparking a debate, and we will probably see more of it in the future. We should not allow trans activists to turn this into a human rights issue. The question here is where we draw the line, and whether or not the hormones that trans athletes take sufficiently suppress their biological advantage. Alright, I think we can now answer the question.
Do you think a trans woman is a woman?
Yes, but there are some instances in which she is not. There are some contexts in which being trans makes an essential difference that defines her from other women. As a society, we should generally treat trans women as women, but also decide the instances in which we treat them differently. If you are a transgendered person, you should realize that this answer does not discriminate you. What I have said about trans women is true in many other cases as well. People who have diabetes, for instance, are usually treated like everyone else, but in some contexts we designate them as diabetics, and treat them differently. It doesn't mean that their human identity is called into question. The same goes for you. When it comes to gender, you are an atypical individual. This means that there are times when we need to treat you differently. Learn to live with it.